I'm very interested in what is called teal organizations. I know in the Netherlands, where you're from, that was a really big thing a decade ago. And there are really interesting studies on self-organizing groups and how productive and outside of the box they can be.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Bloem, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is yet another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who will introduce herself. Åsa, please go ahead.
Hey, everybody. I'm Åsa Skogström Feldt, and I am a Swedish change maker that is very passionate about the world and how we can all live together in a constructive, inclusive, and empathetic way. And my background is that I was always curious about people and what drives them, and especially people from different backgrounds and contexts. So when I was in my early 20s, I did a backpacking trip to Africa, to Tanzania. And I was so impressed with the people and how they were sharing and positive and inviting me, even though they had nothing. And I think in a way that defined the whole rest of my life, although I didn't act on it until many years later. So when I came back to Sweden, I studied sales, marketing, management, international business. And I was working in the corporate world in many different corporates, both in the Nordic countries, but also in Middle East, in Africa, and in Germany. And then after 17 years, I was starting to feel that I needed to do something different. Working in a stock exchange company with very short foresight for us who were close to the customers really made me reevaluate what I was doing. And then I thought to myself, well, didn't I say that at some point in my life, I wanted to do something for people living in Africa and around the world? Well, when am I going to do that? Why not do it now? And when I was in that search mode, I read about an NGO that was called the Hunger Project, and they were really leading change through people. So community-led development as opposed to top-down leadership. And I really believed in that method. That's also my type of leadership over the years. So I reached out to them, and it so happened that they were restarting their organization in Sweden. So I took on that role. So building it again over 8 years, which was really a fantastic learning experience that later on also led to that I became the global president and CEO based from New York, but working with all the 23 countries of the organization.
And that's how we met in New York when you were working in New York, right? Yeah.
That's how we met, yeah.
Yeah, a couple of years ago now. So, if you look back at that period with the Hunger Project, what are you most proud of?
I'm very proud of having been part of the Sustainable Development Goals, because I think that thinking of the previous goals, the Millennium Development Goals, they never really caught on in society. But now, thanks to the very inclusive process with 9 million people giving input, both corporates and the governments and citizens, really made it visible from the start. So I was really proud of being part of that movement. And we actually, at the day of the inauguration of the goals, we launched an NGO coalition called the Movement for Community-Led Development, where we managed to get many NGOs that were working with similar methods to join the alliance, so we could drive the people-focused work forward together in a bigger scale.
And that movement is still going on. Actually, my organization is also part of it. That's how we started to collaborate, right?
Yeah.
So, the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals are also very close to my heart. If you, and I try to promote it and make people aware, within this podcast as well about it. If you have to explain to, our audience why it's important that they know about this and they try to contribute also towards reaching those goals, what would you say?
I think those 17 goals, they are a mix of social challenges and environmental challenges. And I think they are, first of all, we have all agreed upon them through our joint UN representation. And secondly, I think they're a great compass for what is important for people and the planet and the future. So I think if you want to have guidance on what to focus on, it's really a good idea to look into both the goals and the different indicators under each of them that can guide your work on sustainability if you're a corporate, for instance, but also for NGOs, for governments, where to invest your time and money. And also it's being measured and followed up, maybe not to a perfect extent, but at least we can track progress or non-progress and redirect funding towards where it's needed the most.
But then, after having worked for a couple of years for the Hunger Project, you went back to Sweden and also back to IKEA, or not really back? Was it different? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. So the first time I was at IKEA, they were looking into if it's possible to do business with social enterprises. Because IKEA had for a long time, of course, been doing business, but also had a foundation that was purely philanthropic. But they saw that in the civil society sector, there was a new type of companies, the social businesses, the social entrepreneurs that were in the intersection between philanthropy and business. And they were interested in seeing, can we do business? And by doing that, also partner and support them to grow so they can work with more vulnerable groups and be even more inclusive. So that was my first role. And that was, a decade ago, maybe. And then I came back and it was time to see how can we work in that intersection a little bit more, because it was still philanthropy or business relationship. But there was still something missing in the middle. So we created a social enterprise, and it's called IKEA Social Entrepreneurship and we can do support, we can work with grants, we can work with development programs directly with social enterprises or in partnership with NGOs like Ashoka, Acumen, Nest, and others, and support the development of the social businesses in their scaling up efforts. So it's really a hybrid type of working where we combine the best of impact investment with business, but not only doing business, but also to learn. Because we see that there are many things that will affect business long term. Of course, climate is one thing, but also the growing inequalities is really a threat towards us all. So by working with social businesses, we also find social innovation that we can take into our own organization, in our value chains, for instance, or in how we integrate ourselves into markets.
And if I'm not mistaken, if I did my homework properly, you work in 6 areas. You have 6 focus areas. Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends on how you cut it. We work across the world in many different areas, all the way from Mexico and Chile to East Africa to Indonesia and Europe. But then we also look into different types of sectors.
Okay.
It can be smallholders or informal workers or indigenous people, the people who are having the hardest time to have a decent income and a decent livelihood.
And if I ask you, and people are always annoyed with me that I force them to choose, but if you have to, say, oh, this is really, a project that I'm so proud of that we are doing at the moment, which project would you, or initiative would you mention to our audience?
Well, I think one that actually has given also our co-workers a lot of new learnings is an accelerator program we do together with Ashoka, a global accelerator, where we have 10 to 12 different social businesses per cohort, and we look into systems change. So how these social enterprises can really intervene in systems and not only grow their organization organically, but also influence. So we see a total solution to a challenge. And I think trying to understand systems change, working with theories of change, getting all the change pathways to come together, I think that's also a very useful way of looking at things in a business. Because we all are in very complex situations right now. There is no easy fix to the challenges we are facing. So I'm very proud that we have managed to really start to dive deeper into systems change work.
Yeah, and I think it's clear that unfortunately our world has created systems that are not sustainable. If you look at the food system, it clearly needs to change. What IKEA was in the news 1 or 2 days ago. It took part of a number of other agencies that are looking at carbon zero transport. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have joined an alliance. It's part of our business direction. We want to keep being affordable and accessible, but also contributing to a people, society, and planet positive future. So by 2030, we want to have a lot of goals reached, and one of them is to be net positive in carbon.
Yeah, the last question about IKEA is how, if there are organizations or people out there that would like to partner, how should they approach this?
if they're a social business, they can have a look at our webpage, which is IKEA Social Entrepreneurship.org.
Okay.
And they can find ways of getting in contact with us.
Okay, great. And we'll make sure that we mention that in the notes of the podcast. Also, it's also, well, you know that this podcast is a spin-off of my 100-mile walk. I just finished it actually last Sunday.
Congratulations.
But I'm still sore. My feet are I clearly I'm getting older. It's if I compare it with 10 years ago, I'm not as fast anymore, but okay, that's life, I guess. Yeah, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles, so that means 15 to 20 miles per day in a week, yeah, why would you walk?
I would walk, I believe, for the same reason as I'm doing this work. I would walk to give women that are marginalized or vulnerable a voice, who normally necessarily are not part of the discussion or not sitting at the table, but have important things to share and have challenging situations in their everyday life. So definitely for the women of the world.
And maybe a related questions, but for some people it's also different. So when I don't know, I use an alarm clock myself because otherwise I will sleep the whole day. But let's assume that you use an alarm clock as well. When it goes off in the morning, what makes you that you get out of bed and start the day?
Well, I believe I know I'm very privileged to be able to do this work. And that's why I get out of bed, because I can be part of making a change, making the world hopefully more inclusive. And that really gets me going and makes everything I do very worthwhile.
When I do my 100-mile walks, very often we talk about, what is the purpose of life, what drives you, and then many of the conversations they are also about spirituality, about religion, the questions about but it's all related with the purpose. What for me is an interesting conversation is when it's linked with the younger generation, because some of my co-walkers either walk with me physically or virtually say, well, it seems that this younger generation looks at religion and spirituality differently, the way they look at institutionalized religion, etc. So and others say no, it's very similar. So if you look in your environment and at the younger people, the younger generation, what do you see with regard to the youth, the younger people, as well as religion, spirituality, and their perspective on life?
It's a really good question. Now I live in Sweden, which is a very secular society. And so religion is not really entrenched in the way of life here and hasn't been for quite a while. Mm-hmm. So for young people, I think for one group, now sustainability is kind of the new religion. Being climate activists and caring about the future. And Greta Thunberg, she's from Sweden.
Yeah.
So Fridays for Future is really a way that young people get active together and get a voice. Mm-hmm. And so that's one part. And these young people are very, very aware of everything we do and what needs to change, and quite frustrated about that there is no visible change happening and there is only a lot of talk. The blah, blah, blah that Greta spoke about in her last speech. But then on the other side, we have another big group of young people who are not engaged at all. So I think there is a big polarization going on, which probably will not be helpful when it comes to the growing inequalities going forward.
Also, my organization exists this year 75 years. So this is not only a time of celebration, but also of reflection. So one of the things that we are looking at is, how did we do with regard to racial justice? How did we do? And, if we think about the future, what should we do? So if I ask you to give a report card, to give out a grade, to the NGO sector as a whole about racial justice, what do you think? How do you think NGOs did? And I know it's difficult to generalize, but I'm asking you anyway. What are the things that? How did we do as a sector?
Well, first of all, I think this is a very important topic and something we all need to tackle together. It's not only for NGOs to tackle. I think it needs to be a cross-sector work. And of course, it is deeply entrenched in all societies and more or less visible, more or less violent, more or less subtle. And the challenge is when it gets more subtle, it will probably not be addressed. So I think the NGO sector has done a good job in shining light on challenges and also trying to engage others. But of course, there is always so much more that can be done. And I would say that all aspects of inequality are difficult and growing right now. The growing inequalities is really a challenge for the future. And when it comes to Sweden, where I live, we probably discuss more around integration and discrimination, but it's all interconnected, of course. And the NGO and social enterprise sector here does a lot of work with specifically access to jobs and income opportunities. So language training, vocational training, networks, internships, to try to break the segregation. And like in many societies, of course, a network means everything. And it is very hard to get into the Swedish society if you're a migrant or refugee, or even if you have an academic background and long experience. And if you can get someone to open the door, the first door, or if you can be the one opening that door, we would not miss out on so much potential and so much talent that gets wasted here today. And I hope and also have seen that at least since we have free education, all the way through to university, it makes it a little bit easier to break the cycle of exclusion.
And what are some of the things that your company is doing about this?
We are very committed to both being an inclusive business and to promote equality in all the different ways we can do. And the work I do, for instance, with supporting social enterprises and work, especially the ones that work with vulnerable communities and populations, we have a big focus on supporting, accelerating, shining light on, and partnering with them. And hopefully that can also contribute to a more equal society.
I think there are we have a lot of challenges at the moment in this world. Well, what do you worry about most?
I think I worry about that we don't get to action. I think we have we have managed to set the goals. We have even managed to set the indicators of the goals. And we talk a lot about collaboration, making it together in partnership. And the goal 17 is about partnerships. But to be honest, I really don't see any new actions coming up. We're still saying the same thing. We're still dwelling in the challenge, not in the solutions. So that keeps me up at night. I think really need to find new ways of working together, because we cannot solve this one by one or 10 by 10 or in groups. We need to have a joint vision and commit to it and act together.
Where do you still see hope?
Well, it's interesting. I'm following a new movement that is called the Inner Development Goals. I think that's super interesting, because the Sustainable Development Goals are still very factual. But what type of leadership will it take to create that new future together? And that is a leadership style that is more empathetic, that is more inclusive, and all the things we have been talking about. So the inner development goals are now being researched and developed, and will hopefully be part of the UNESCO and the UN commitment going forward. So that gives me hope. And I see that there are both governments, institutions, and corporates and universities that are now joining that movement. So maybe we can see a breakthrough in new ways of leading going forward.
That's very interesting. In the previous episode, I talked with Brian Buck, and he talks about servant leadership, and so it's interesting that we often talk about leadership. How do you try to become a better or remain a good leader?
I do believe I am a servant leader. I'm trying to, first of all, I'm trying to enroll co-workers that stand in the same basic values. And that is also one of the IKEA strengths, that we have very clear values. And that is the first criteria. And then we look at your other capabilities and the competence. So I'm trying to create a diverse team that complement each other. And I'm very interested in what is called teal organizations. I know in the Netherlands, where you're from, that was a really big thing a decade ago. And they're really interesting studies on self-organizing groups and how productive and outside of the box they can be. So I give a lot of responsibility, but I'm also trying to facilitate when things get stuck, so that we can continue together towards our result. And as long as we get to the result we want to create, the way we get there doesn't really matter, I believe.
Are you, because you are for many, many years already a leader and in charge of organizations, are you coached yourself do you have people you go to?
Yes, I always have had mentors and coaches throughout. I actually became a leader already when I was 23, so I've had a long experience. I wish I would have had a coach back then. That wasn't really a thing then. But and especially if you are a CEO or if you are in the executive level, sometimes it's quite lonely. And you don't want to bounce everything off with your team. Sometimes you have some tough decisions you have to make, or other things that gets in your way. So I always try to have coach / or mentor.
I love music, so I always have a question about music as well. So if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that embodies, for a big part, what you are about, what song or piece of music would you share with us?
Yeah, that was a really tricky one. There are so many good ones. And then I thought about a band that I know is really committed to the SDG, which is Coldplay.
Okay.
And Coldplay has a song that is about, I think it's called Miracles, but it's about that everyone is special. So you can be whoever you want to be. And heaven is inside of you, and you have the fire in your eyes, and you can go further than you believe or everyone else believes. So it's a lot about believing in yourself and having a vision and go for it.
Great. Yeah. And so just a reminder for the listeners. So we made a Spotify playlist for the Walk Talk Listen, #Walk Talk Listen. And then you see all the songs that have been selected or chosen by the guest of this podcast. So it's really interesting. We have from heavy metal to classical music to musicals as well as pop. And Coldplay is actually, I saw that band during in New York City. How did this called? Global Citizen.
Yeah, I did too in Central Park.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That was good.
And they are great to walk to also. I think you will get some new energy from walking to this song.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So, these conversations always go fast. My last question for you is, do you have a message, an invitation, or a question for the listeners?
Yeah, my invitation is to think about a world, an equal world going forward. And what is your contribution? How would you like the world to be when your time is up? What would you like to have contributed with? And it doesn't have to be change the whole world, but maybe you have been empathetic to everyone you have met during your day, or being inclusive, or speaking up and inviting the ones that are not being seen or listened to. So that would be my invitation. What would you do tomorrow?
Great. I think that's a great ending of this conversation. I really encourage listeners to check out your webpage. I'll make sure that it is in the notes of the podcast. Thank you so much, Åsa, for your time and your willingness to speak with me today. I learned a lot. So I hope, I'm sure the listeners as well. So thank you so much, and good luck with everything you do.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to see you again.
That's great.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram. I just finished the 10th 100-mile walk, and I really encourage you to check out our website 100mile.org to see how you can still contribute to this campaign. Thank you.